Evening, everybody. This is JD with Third Degree with JD. Of course, I am your host. I am here with two amazing women. They're going to be discussing our first podcast this evening, which is going to be about what we've called sex and berries. What does that mean? We will truly try to find out if we can. How we got here is from many conversations of what we call the human condition. And what does that mean for us humans on this earth? How did we go from quadrupeds to standing beings operating and living in today's 2023 environment? So, without further ado, I have the brunette assassin here today. Also, Mrs. Renee Whitney, bringing those psychological operational powers to this conversation. I do appreciate everything that everybody will bring to this conversation, and I look forward to where we go from here. So, the flow for this, as with anything, is I want it to be free-flowing. We'll throw some ideas out and we'll discuss them and see where we go from there. So the idea for Sex and Berries came from a conversation that basically originated from like, hey, what does it mean to be a man in today's world? What does it mean to be a woman in today's world? What is masculinity? What is femininity? How has that been defined over time? How has that been defined for us over time by our environment, the people around us, our religions, our faiths, our friends, families? How has all of that shaped us as a society to where we are today? I think this leads to other conversations and other podcasts that we're going to lead into from here, which will really study what it is to be a man, which is where conflicted will go. Minimized, that's going to really look at the female form, femininity, and what does it mean to be that in today's society. And then, of course, we'll move on from there. So I would ask each of you before we get started, by all means, go ahead and introduce yourselves to the interwebs out there. Say hello, welcome to the world of Third Degree with JD. The questions will be tough. They will be hot. Hopefully they will be decisive and bring a little excitement to this podcast for our at least one subscriber that we have right now. So I appreciate you, whoever you are out there. Thank you very much. And we will certainly do our best to entertain you. That is our job. So thank you very much. So BA, by all means, opening statements, feel free.
So I'm brunette assassin, Christy Martin. I have a background, so I was raised 7th generation Shrijaria, so a lot of healers in my family. My formal studies are human behavior, specializing in trauma, and that's complex trauma, post-traumatic trauma, stress, and super excited to have this conversation. Renee.
Renee Whitney. So I've had a few experiences in psychological operations on a military front, and what that means to incorporate in different countries, how that affects those different behaviors in audiences. And I'd like to discuss a lot of how that incorporates in Sex and Berries.
Mm-hmm.
But moreover, I'm just super excited to be able to be a part of this because I think it's going to be epic. So.
Agree.
Thank you for
I
having me.
truly appreciate both of you ladies joining me here today. And of course, we have to give the nod to the wonderful Mrs. Kelly Davis, who is our in-house videographer and
Little
videotaper.
picture taker.
Thank you, Kels.
She will be taking care of all of the programmatic photos.
She's
and
too
everything
cute
that
to
we
be behind
made.
the scenes. Look at her.
She is
She's a
very
big
cute.
helper.
She is.
So, starting this conversation off, we have to look at, I guess, what in everybody's mind defines masculinity and what defines femininity. Because here's my angle with all of this. I believe that masculinity in and of itself has been under, I would say, attack in the United States here recently. I would even say that femininity, the feminine form, has also been under attack in the United States. But what does that mean in an analogous state? We went from, quadrupeds and monkeys screaming our voices into the jungle to get our mate's attention or potential suitor's attention to where we are today. And how is that all transcribed over time? And what does that mean? What has been brought from generations before us through today? And how is that either informed our intellect or hurt our intellect, our development? And are we as a society progressing, or are we regressing?
Mm.
Or is everything that we see today, in fact, a natural cycle that is nature? Reading previously the book, Charles Darwin here, the Descent of Man, one thing I got from out of that was things have been going on for a very long time. The things that we see are not new, which is interesting to me, because as he's talking and researching things, even in the 1870s, he's talking about the very things that we're seeing today.
Mm-hmm.
So is, in fact, are we just in a natural cycle? And the things that we may or may not believe that we see today as natural, is that something that has been taught or learned, pushed, influenced, and if so, by whom? So I would guess my first question to each one of you ladies is, what does masculine mean to you? Any one of you can go first. Christine, Renee.
So I wish I would have brought my notes now. He's got notes.
Of course I do.
And
I would not come
that's
unarmed to this fight.
I think that to approach this conversation at all, I believe now and always that words are very important, and so the words that we use in having these discussions should be carefully chosen. So when we say things like masculinity, femininity are under attack, I would prefer to say under scrutiny. So what we're doing is we're looking at it and we're redefining. Has what we've used for hundreds of years, thousands of years, actually working for us right now? Or do we need a different paradigm for that? And when we're looking at if masculinity is up first, I think that there's a beautiful old paradigm of what a divine masculine is, and as a giver and a protector, as somebody who can provide, as somebody who can stand up and stand to the homestead, and we have all of these kind of archaic beliefs, but they've stood the test of time in a lot of different cultures. And now I think that because we live in such a luxurious society, something that we don't have a lot of information about previously, we're seeing some of the fundamentals of what was the masculine being chaired a little bit, being shelved a little bit, I think, and that we don't need as much protection, I don't think, as women. And the protection that we do need actually happens to be for most of the males we're around. And so, understanding what we view as healthy in a society where we have so much luxury, we have so much privilege, we have so many things handed to us. What is a healthy masculine person right now?
So because we hear this all the time, that, privilege across, whether it's race or man versus woman, this and that, is our worldly privilege a positive net gain, or are we actually degrading society because we've become so privileged? Are we impacting, I guess, the natural order of things? Because that's one thing that I've always seen, just lightly reading through this stuff, is there's a natural order of what I would consider Mother Nature.
So
You know,
a point that I want to hit on with that, because those are complex topics, right? To each and of
Sure,
itself,
yeah,
in and of
absolutely.
itself, are vastly proportionate on what that would mean for a society. The masculinity aspect, yes, I would agree that we have not had a reason to have that fight, or a reason to have that protection, or a reason to have that compounded masculinity that makes it so prominent that it was even 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that we are living in an identity crisis on a consistent basis. And the reason why I think that is because you have a lot more voices out there that are a part of the LGBTQ community, that are struggling with marriage, that are struggling with identifying themselves and what their roles play. As women become more independent and more profound in their own professions, finding themselves, it makes it very difficult for the men to stabilize their own titles. And it's harder for women to help lift them up because we're constantly feeling stressed out that we're doing more than just one job, right?
Well, and there's roles that even if they are subconscious, do you feel, as ladies, I can't answer this question, that is there, because all of those things that you just mentioned are exactly where this podcast is going. How does all of these things impact our daily lives? How does it impact marriage? How does it impact communication? How does it impact the very actions that men take, that women take, that, because I think we can all agree that toxicity is not subjective to one species, male or female. I think that exists on both sides. You can be just as much a toxic man as you can be just as much a toxic woman. And they can be just as much as a destructive force as either one. And if they're paired, there's a whole nother conversation. But all of those are kind of where this podcast kind of was born from, that human condition. What does all of this mean, and how does it impact us? And it's absolutely complex, because when you really start looking at it at the granular level, it really is. It's there's a lot there. And how does that impact our dating lives, our lives with our children, our communication with our children, our communication with our families, parenting? All of those things are impacted by, but feasibly, could have been generational data points that have been plugged into this system that we have to now deal with. So what does that all mean to us as humans in 2023? How does that impact us? And I think that, in the end, is kind of the end state, or what we wanted to get out of this podcast, is how do we become better human beings? How do we, because man, all you gotta do is turn on the TV, turn on the radio, it doesn't matter what it is. The things that you see today are how we treat each other as a society are mind-blowing, you know, from person to person, from community to community, from government to community, it doesn't matter. There is a deficit in care, I believe. And where did that spawn from? And how can we impact that as humans, as good people that we try to be? How can we do that? And how can we transform that and transcribe that into our relationships?
So I'm extremely passionate about this one specific topic, but I actually want to hear what you have coming out of this, and I'm going to hold what I got with
Keeping your cards close.
yeah,
Smart psychological operations.
with a
Never
particular
show your
point,
hand.
yeah, with a particular point. But I really want to hear what it is that you have to say first.
Well, I think it's interesting because we have such a fundamental loss of community, so it's really hard to have a baseline for such a big question like that. And I, can only use my personal experience, which is that I, have so many amazing women in my circle that work non-stop on themselves to be better, to do better, to communicate more, to work harder, to be better moms. They never stop. They just never stop. And I have also a large circle of men, and they just seem to struggle more with that. And I think, that the key thing was, you just said, turn on the television, and I don't see very many women doing that. We don't turn on the television. We don't only talk through social media. We still have our sewing circles for the most part. We have our gathering circles. We meet, we talk, we heal in these circles, and we bring, we still bring our pain to each other. We still bring our hearts to each other, and we have very open conversations. Not all women, of course, and like I said, it's not a baseline, because I'm so fortunate to be surrounded by amazing women. But I think that in that is so much to be said, that we have more and more men that I know, and maybe it's not all men, but they're turning on the television, they're getting frustrated with their impotence about doing things, right? Men used to be able to do things. If you were mad or frustrated at the government, you went and started a militia, and you made things happen. And the radical impotence that has really driven men down to be very small, I think, is a baseline for the toxicity and for the and that's such a terrible word, but for the lack of health that we're seeing. It's because they're doers, and they don't have an outlet for their doing. So, we have more Facebook fights and social media wars, and well, they said this and they said this, and I saw this on the news, but nobody's, taking that next step of action, which is where men really grow. That's where they become. And I think that's why, you just see this default of men feeling like they can't do so much, and this is, of course, more for later, like going into every sociopath in documented history is a man who's been forced.
Sociopaths.
Absolutely not. But when we're seeing what we're taking them as the most hurt male, and you can put them on an axis, because we don't have a whole bookload of women serial killers. We just don't have that, so we can look at the men who have done that and say, oh wow, this is how this came about, and it's super consistent, and it's super consistent to what we're seeing men go through right now in large mass.
Well, I think too, so generationally, and I would say evolutionary, if that's a word, So again, just referring back to the book. So when Darwin was looking at evolution as a thing, he noted purposefully that emasculation in any species would cause degradation of that male over time and space. So when you look at that as a problem set, you know, men as a problem set, masculinity as a problem set, 100%, they were always doers. That's how they survived from day one. The man, he had to hunt, he had to survive, he had to source food for himself, he had to defend himself, whether that was against another man, another tribe, an animal, it didn't matter. He had to do something, and that added value and thus intellect to that individual as a whole. He became a more sharpened person. The more he fought, the more he, hunted, the more he fished, he got better. He got stronger as a man. And if he didn't, the natural order of things was he died, or he did not survive that process. So as we have grown as humans, are we, as a society, emasculating men to the point that it's degrading their value, both mentally, physically, all of that? Like, one example that they got and was, as we matured from quadrupeds and all these things for his stuff, our canines reduced in size because, one, we never used them. We quit using them. So there was no longer a use for them. So they shrunk. If we, you take it, look at that one example. Okay, yeah, we no longer used our canines, which also, funny enough, changed our facial features. We went from these gangly toothed males to something that had a more regular form, which again, in turn, made men more presentable to the female form. But over time, as we no longer had to fight and protect our women and families, we're pretty privileged today. I don't have to worry, 9 times out of 10 that a tribal faction is going to come in and try to steal my wife away from me anymore. That's pretty much gone. Same for the women. They don't have to worry about being hauled off by another tribe and enslaved and taken to another husband. So with that, as we've grown as a society, become more privileged, getting back to your point, over time and space, is that why this identity crisis is manifesting more so now than I've seen in my life? So in my lifetime, I never imagined I would see some of the things that I'm seeing today. So is it just a natural progression or a natural understanding? A more heightened awareness? Is it that natural order? Or are we actually, through the things that we are doing within society, hurting the granular masculine form that is the doer, that is, because that gets to the root of it. And I think that does have an impact on men. It's an absolute, question, when there is a woman in the household. Maybe she's the money maker. I would have no doubt there's a study out there that shows that has an impact on men's mindsets, physically, mentally, how they handle that. So is what we're doing helping? What, like?
So I would dissect that as best as I possibly could by bringing out the cards that I held to my chest earlier, by stating I had a very close-knit family growing up and it was toxic. Everything was for the family. You provided for the family. You gave to the family. But what I grew to understand at a very young age was that my grandmother was actually allowing my grandfather to climb into a hole and not be a whole of who he was. So with that example, it reaches back generations, as you stated. Now, I'm not going to go back to the Stone Ages with my example, but I think that we have had a perpetual problem in today's society that reaches back a few generations, where women and men were not on the same footing. Women, for a very long time, held up the pillars of a family and the home while trying to create and sustain their own identities. There was a cusp of revolution that pushed past this blockage to allow women a stronger voice, to have that strength to create consistency. But at the same time, you're right, men did not fully allow themselves to be branched out in a way that created their own independence on a consistent basis with their women. And I say their women because for a long time it was looked down upon in society where you could not be of a same-sex couple. Mm-hmm. You couldn't, whether you were male or female, it didn't matter. Mm-hmm. Men were driven to relationships of the opposite sex because it was what it was expected.
Yeah.
So
that was the designated norm.
Right. So as a society, men and women were not allowed, according to society standards, to really be who they were, whether they were more masculine or more feminine. They were looked down upon and therefore hidden. That didn't create a good standard for men in general, and that didn't create a good standard for women either. Now, getting back to your previous statement and question, specifically to men, I have seen examples where aggression has perpetuated itself in a relationship because they weren't allowed to be able to be who they truly were. Mm-hmm. And I have seen relationships where women and men both suffered in those relationships because they were not allowed, according to their own histories, according to their own families, according to their own social circles, they were not allowed to be who they were, and they did not have that bridge or that strength to build them up the way that they needed to be that great person that they were meant to be. Mm-hmm. It's hurtful because we live in a society currently that I think for the last 40 years we have had a certain standard, and we have tried to revolutionize that standard into our own identities. It has not created a benefit. It has created a breaking point. It's extremely difficult to look at a person who doesn't identify in your mold to say this person is the strong example of what we want as a male or a female. Because to be a woman, you're supposed to be feminine and dainty and cute. Never mind the sapiosexuals who are attracted to the brain. Never mind the strength that they have to birth children. Never mind the strength that they have day in and day out to help build up their family or their career or whatever stance they want to take. And the men are lost because
they have been ingrained since day one. Well, you're supposed to provide for the family, you're supposed to take care of your family, you're supposed to have this great career, you're supposed to be the breadwinner, you're supposed to have this standard encapsulated in this cocoon. But when you break out and you become a butterfly, no matter what you do, it's not a perpetuated state, it's a one-off.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't allow for that independence or that creativity, and it leaves us broken.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely creates a problem, because in prior times, and the things that you are saying are 100%. I mean, that you could have read this book 100%. So in previous times, I mean, it's spelled out black and white. I mean, this isn't something new. There was a natural selection for sex over time and space. To no fault of their own, our ancestors all over the world wanted to be with the hot guy or the hot chick. You weren't hot, guess what? You got sold into slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Or, if you were of no value, typically younger babies that were female, you were discarded because you added no value to the tribe. So, and if anything, you would become a potential hindrance to the tribe because you could get pregnant, whatever. In their mind, there was no value there, so they discarded them. So, which gets, it's a great lead into our future conversations on our podcast, Minimized, and how that is ingrained from, I'm not sure what starting point there is. I don't know if there's a mark in history that culture of minimization was manifested long before we ever got here. But it's been perpetuated. So how do we change that? Put a pin in that. We'll come back to that point. Because that's another conversation. But I think that you struck a lot on a great segue into what is feminine. What is the feminine? So I again pose the question to each of you as ladies. What does or what is femininity or the divine feminine to you?
I think that's so much still in the works, just like I think that healthy masculinity is still something that's under so much subjugation, and it's becoming easier to define as a woman because we are working so hard to be healthy. I think the rise in the divine feminine, like you said, over the past 40 years has been an insurgence that we haven't seen in history. It's absolutely insane. I mean, in 1973, man could still rape his wife legally. If she refused sex, he could rape her. And to see in one generation women stand up and say, this will not be our story, because there's nothing that the men were doing at the time that we couldn't. And so we started to do those things. We worked, we earn, we raise kids by ourselves, we have fun with our friends, we take ourselves on vacations, we buy our own groceries and we pay our own bills, and we still thrive, we still learn, and we still gather, and we still create. And I think that is the most beautiful and absolute definition of what it is to be a healthy and divine feminine, is that we are unstoppable. There's nothing that is going to stop us from creating beauty, from creating home. Anything that you give a healthy woman, she will multiply. And we have decided to do that on our own because we had to stop relying on the men we were seeing, and I'm not again saying that they're not out there. I'm just saying that it just seemed like men stopped when it came to providing or protecting. If that wasn't the definition of what they could do anymore, you mentioned it as emasculating, but we stopped looking for that old paradigm a long time ago, and we started looking for partners, and that's when we felt a lot of kickback, I think, from men, that they didn't want to partner. They want the old paradigm. They want the woman at home and the men working, and like you said, it hurt too much everybody because you were fulfilling a role that wasn't innately yourself. So I think that the divine feminine is really living in its most beautiful existence right now. I know so many beautiful females that, and it's not a perfect thing. I don't think that we ever achieve that. It's just the constant work to say, this is what it means to be a woman to me, and I won't stop until I get there, you know. But I think that we have better clarified as women what we think it means to be healthy females, you know.
So, I'm going to try very hard not to blow your mind on this next part, but from what I've gathered in my experience, which is minimal to some people out there, and it's understandable, but masculinity and femininity are not simply segregated to males and females.
100%.
And it is so wonderful that we are living in this cataclysmic chaos right now, because we are able to drive that train left, right, forward, backward, and help mold what that means. And to your point, and yours, JD, I think it's important that we recognize that those men and those women have both masculinity and femininity.
100%.
They have been striving for so long
To balance.
to create that balance.
Yes.
The partners that you're discussing, it is difficult, extremely difficult for people to drop the original titles that we have been given over decades. And I think it's important that we recognize in men and women their masculinity traits and their femininity traits.
You're right, because the old paradigm was a man is all of the masculine and a woman is all of the feminine, and we have really just worked so hard to embody that within ourselves, that balance
Yes.
of whatever that means. And so when it comes to finding a partner, when it comes to that healthy,
Right.
whether it's masculine, whether it's a male female, female female, male male,
Yes.
it's how are we balancing our inner, and you can masculine feminine, yin yang.
So we,
You know, so we can call it that as well.
Right.
How are you balanced, and how is my balance going to trigger
Complementing.
your balance or complement it
how
in
do
both?
right.
Because that's where growth begins.
Right. And how do we build that up as partners?
Yeah,
How do we allow and
partners.
Partners.
And that's the goal, I think.
Yeah,
You know, that's the
because-
real change.
men in general for so long, again reverting back to my grandparents, my grandfather was stuffed in a garage whenever he wasn't working on something for the next project. He was never allowed in the kitchen to help cook or to help clean or to help tend the children. That was the woman's job, that was the grandmother's job.
Well,
And
then it would have been
Sacrosanct.
sacrosanct,
Yes,
exactly, for the
exactly.
man,
Right.
if his buddies were around,
But how many
to go in and say, hey, hon, do you need me to shake off the beans?
Right. But
I mean,
how
that
many
would have
men
been-
how many men have we seen in today's society pick up their child, kiss their cheeks and love on them and give them that appreciation and that adoration that their mom are at work and they aren't able to make it home to kiss their boo-boos or braid their hair,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
So I think that we are living in a turning point right now, and it is crucial for us to have that moment to be able to witness that chaos. It is still chaos, and it is still hurt, and it is still floundering. But I think we as a society are supposed to build each other up into that partnership, and that's where we're
Yes.
going.
Oh, absolutely. And again, what you guys are saying, you know, it's like you guys have seen this book. So, what's interesting?
We may have read
you
Darwin
may
a time or
have
two.
Darwin or two. You know, it's like, so what's funny is that you guys talk about partners, and one of the things that was, you know, this is 1870 that he was looking at, his 1860s that he was, you know, running around looking at stuff, and they were considering and seeing on a large scale what would they considered or what they would determine to be useful slaves is what women were. They weren't, there wasn't that partnership. So at least it was interesting to see the identification. Hey, wait, this is not,
Okay.
there's a difference here. And sadly, I still think we're dealing with that.
Mhm.
There is, to this day, this belief, which is, you know, I mean, we only know what we know. We only know what we've been told, how we've been influenced. You know, when we have parental figures, you know, in a matriarchal society, if grandma says something, if grandpa says something, that was gospel in my eyes growing up. They could do no wrong.
Mhm.
You know, I would never have questioned my grandpa growing up. Are you kidding me? Like, grandma would have been on my butt for that stuff, and vice versa. So, but the institution of those thought processes have really transcended time and are still, which is crazy to think. You know, you mentioned, you know, that the women's right movements, the right to vote, that wasn't too far, that wasn't long ago
No.
in the grand scheme of things. Which is amazing to think, you know, like BA was talking, like, oh, you can just, the female body is my body because I signed this document that said it's mine, so be it. Wow,
Which we literally just took away again.
Yes.
you know, and
Roe
it's
versus
like,
Wade got redacted.
wow, okay. But I think a lot of that drives the issues that we see now, and that is that identity crisis. And I think even more so, there is so many more questions being posed today, which aren't necessarily a bad thing.
No.
Not that I agree with them all or any of that, but you know, when you're looking at things like transgenders, binary, non-binary things in society, classifications, I would say, whatever, deviations of the norms.
Mhm.
I think I think they cannot be divisive just because they are against the norm. Just like back in the 20s, it was against the norm for grandpa to go in and shake the beans in the sink. That
Right.
wasn't his place. He was supposed to be having a bourbon and a cigar. That's what he was meant to be. That was it. Nana took care of things. That was her job. She cooked the food, she did the things, she provided the berries to the feast, you know. So it's a fascinating subject of how things are still very different, are very different from the past, but how eerily similar things are to today. And have we grown or have we not grown? I don't know. I think that's still up for debate on things, but I don't think it's wrong to ask those questions and try to figure out, okay, from all of this noise that we see and we experience as men, as women, the individuals we meet and the things they do, and whether they're good women or bad women or bad guys or good guys or all of that, how do we what do we take from those? And how do we learn? And how do we move forward? How do we progress? And how do we share that with the world and try to make some sense of what's going on? Because I think there are a lot of questions. I have no doubt there are a lot of questions about what, people see today. Just 1 second. Not quite sure what happened there. Well, welcome back. Quick, apparently our machine wanted to take a nap, so that's okay.
Just a quick one.
I totally understand. I get it. Yeah, don't we all? But yeah, I think, so how do we interpret, what masculinity is, what it's supposed to be, what does femininity mean, what does that mean, and how do we take that and improve upon it as individuals? Because there is a lot, the dating world
Oh,
would scare me to death. And
So
just that you're, oh my God, this fucking,
Oh, it's so bad.
it's fucking killing me here. That's why. I believe that was the problem. Yes, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Yes, thank you very much. Hey, what's a few glitches in the matrix, You know what I'm saying? That's another conversation though. Hopefully that's for future podcasts, you know what I'm saying? So, but again, yeah, the dating life, and that's what we will eventually get to in future podcasts, is how does all of this translate into that, into dating, into communicating. They kind of laughingly sent out a picture of a conversation or a piece in the book that was, but it spoke to me, because women are always about communication.
Mm-hmm.
He never communicates. Motherfucker. I swear to God.
I can get you.
Just watch a moment while I work this thing out. It's all good. We're gonna keep on trucking here. It's little system hiccups.
First day glitches.
First
That's
day
right.
glitches.
That's right.
And all the anyway.
She done.
Fine. It'll be alright. So when we're looking at those things, yeah, go ahead and take those off. And as we get into future conversations on that and how communication is so key. But the point I was trying to make was that women are all about communication. Always have been. He never
Right.
communicates. He doesn't communicate enough. He doesn't share his feelings with me. He doesn't talk. And I'm reading through the book, and it's talking about how males of all species often only communicate
Through action.
when they're
Sex.
trying to,
No sex.
again, which is perfect for this whole instance here, to breed and to acquire a mate. That's when they are the most vocal. And when they are not, as the book points out, they either communicate minimally or they are absolute mutes in the process,
Absolutely.
which is, I found interesting because here we are, again, hundreds of years in the future, and we're hearing the same thing again. Men don't communicate enough. They are not using their voices to tell me what the hell is going on in their minds. They only talk when they want something, and it's typically around getting booty or something like that, or reproduction.
But we're also seeing the fact that men are killing themselves at a rate that is unrivaled in history, right? So the shift being that we as women have gone through an entire generation of redefining what we feel it is to be a woman, and to not have that taken from us. And I think the only way that you get there is by saying, I will forego a mate. I will forego the attention. I will forego all these things. And I will take the time to focus on myself and find out, what does Christine think it is to be a woman? What do I think it is to show up in my femininity or my masculinity? What brings me balance? And then from there, and only once I really define those things, because I mean, we as a people aren't doing that anymore. You know, we leaned so much on religion for so long to tell us how to be. And now that we're redefining it in ourselves, you have to go back to every single thing. Like, what do I think is moral? What do I think is okay? What is good? What is bad? What do I personally think, you know, is good? And then what do I bring to the table? What do I expect from a partner, right? So we're doing that as individuals more and more. And men as a whole, I think, are just stuck. They're stuck in that old paradigm, which is, I mean, in their functionality as a toddler, that's what you look at. A toddler and a teenager, you're looking at big emotions around the fact that you're asking them to do more. Right? You're growing up. We need you to do more. And you're going to get that pushback. And that's what we're seeing from men right now. The thing about it is that we as women, if we really, really want the paradigm shift for a healthy, whole masculine, have to be ready to hold space for when we say, it's time to feel your emotions. It's time to just not be that stoic dude who doesn't feel anything, right? Because we're looking for partners now. It's not man and a woman. Like you said, you know, we're shifting to where we want partners. And if our partner is going to talk to us, then he has got to feel like it is okay to not have the world on his shoulders. He has got to feel like it's okay if he's missing a paycheck. He's got to feel like it's okay if he's not the most masculine dude in the room. Like, am I still attracted to you? Do I still want to take you home? Are you still my man? If you feel things that aren't just blank, you know, and we have to hold space for that as women.
Yes.
It is time for us to be strong enough for our men to feel their emotions, which is really, really hard. And asking them to do that is going to take years. I mean, that's going to take years. It took us, you know, over 100 years just from voting to being where we can hold down an entire household, right? We've taken over that paradigm essentially. And now we're going to, you know, it's time for us to step up and say, you can heal, and we can hold space for that. We're strong enough to hold space for you to sit down and be like, I feel things and they're huge and they're big and I need to cry and I need to talk about this. And it may not be anything we're trying to talk about, you know, it may be your childhood, you know, how you were raised, all these things, because we've been talking about that and it's hard and we know how hard it is.
Yeah.
But getting a man to open up, and that he's gonna have to be just surrounded by
where it's-
camaraderie.
it's a paradigm shift for women now. As much as it was for man to watch the growth of woman as a partner, as a powerful form, now the inverse has to take place. So, and like you said, that could take it took years for society to take into account and grow, and we're still growing and still learning and still accepting, hey, that women can do all of these things. They can be the breadwinner. They can do the things that man can do. I don't think there's anything out there right now that I can think of that a woman couldn't do that a man can do. However, the inverse of that is now
What's the place for
societal
men?
women are now going to have to understand in order to accept the new man, the new masculine, which is not just, hunting, fishing, hammer, nails, analogous stuff to that. Stoic, no emotion, no nothing. You've asked for a change on multiple fronts. Multiple fronts. You've gained on multiple fronts. So now there's this shift of, in order to get to that absolute partnership and understanding, there has to be an understanding from the feminine side that, hey, there's a transition coming. There is a transition that must take place. Now, is that appropriate? I guess that question needs to be asked. Is that a natural progression of things?
So there's two things that I kind of want to contribute to this, and I'm going to try to baby step it, because in no way, shape, or form do I speak for all women or all men. And being a man, I can't speak on the front of men except to say that I understand. I understand that I have absolutely no idea what it has been like to be a man, and nor would I ever want to. Perfectly comfortable being a woman, always have been, always will be. I'm very happy with that. But the cosmic subject that we are addressing right now, with how the shift is changing, and you're right to both of your points, we have sustained a perpetual growth in women that have advanced us to a point where we are thriving in today's day and age, and we are within our sewing circles, and we are within our communications, and we are getting stronger. But as men evolve, and as men grow, and as men reach their own titles, it is extremely difficult for them to reach a comfort zone. So I say all that to say there's two things that I wanted to address here. The first one is the lessons that we give to our children by the masculinity and the femininity. First and foremost, with my daughter, I teach her that you have got to fully love who you are before you can embrace that in another human being. Whether it is a male or female, it doesn't matter, or non-binary, or whatever titles they want to have or address. We as individuals need to understand who we are as an individual and love everything about who we are and what makes us who we are. It is vital to have our circles, it's vital to have our community, it's vital to have that bolstered positivity. But if it doesn't come from who we are internally, then we'll never reach who we are supposed to be as humans.
And how often, really, if you think about that, and this gets at another segment of this podcast, which is the toxicity within parenting. How do we
3 or 4 segments for that.
Right.
how do we, outside of, just improving ourselves, that's one step in this process. But how do we then inform all future generations, to include our children, to understand those things. All of these things that we've been talking about. What does it mean to be masculine? What does it mean to be feminine? What are those rules? What is okay? What is not okay? How do they fit into that? I mean, when you look at that, did you have any of these conversations with your parents ever?
Yes.
You did?
Yes, I did.
Like, I know for me personally, like, you know, I went back and I tried to think of what is a moment in time where my parent taught me something or said, hey, Johnny, XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Susie, XYZ. And we've had this conversation kind of, you know, I said it kind of offhandedly, but if there was a manual for how to be a good human or how to raise a human, how would that start? You know, page 1. What does it look like? You know, and I don't think that communication, which is another piece of this, occurs. And I think technology and all of these things have led to a degradation in that communication between parents, friends, associates, lovers, flings, whatever. All of that is playing a part in this problem set that we see today, because though all of the things that we've been discussing is not being communicated about on a grand scale. Most people are just flying by the, you know, I would hope these conversations are happening. You know, sitting around the fire, husbands and wives are talking about things.
Or husbands and husbands.
Husbands and husbands, or whoever that is, that those conversations are happening. And I guess my question is, are they?
So, to the manual part, there was a joke when you first become a parent, or even before, when you're in the conception portion and you just find out that you're pregnant and you're going to have a child. The number one joke of this manual that does not exist, because all of us are winging it. No matter how much education you get, no matter how much advice you get, you're going to screw something up. But the first manual paragraph in this book was, you are your worst critic as a parent, and not to be so hard on yourself, because we are our worst critics as humans.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't give ourselves enough credit for the things that we do. I'm not stating that every single human on earth is absolutely flawless and that we need to give ourselves a pat on the back. What I'm saying is we are going to mess up as humans. We're going to miss the mark. And the only thing that we have to go forward is to remember those mistakes, understand our history, reevaluate our history, go back into our history. Because it's often stated that if we don't do that, then we're doomed to repeat it because we forget it.
And doing it, I think, with intention with our children is paramount. So, you know, when you have these young men and young women, you have these children, and I'm, you know, with you, I didn't have parents that taught me anything about how to be anything. You know, I raised myself, and so when my kids came, I had to take a very forceful look, inner critic too, but also say, I don't know how to do this. I'm not a good human, you know, so how the hell am I supposed to teach them how to be good humans?
How do I do this?
I know.
This is
Raise
beyond
kids.
flawed though. You know, when I
Yeah.
had my daughter, I was a bad person, you know, and I can look at that and I can be like, man, you know, having her changed everything. I was like, I gotta be better for this, but I don't know what better looks like. And same with my son, you know, at that time, I couldn't tell them, this is what a healthy young lady, this is what a healthy young man does. I don't know, but what I can do is hold space for you as a human, your authentic human, however you came to be. My son is very, very emotional. He's very sensitive, but he's also a little badass, you know? So it's, you know, that diversity is already in him. And I just encourage that, like, hey, it's okay to cry. Also, like, cool, you killed a thing, you know, that's who he is, you know, and, you know, just being able to say, however you feel isn't wrong. I think that's just a big step in raising healthy humans, is to say, I don't need to raise a badass dude. I don't need to raise a boss ass female. I need to raise the kids I was given to be healthy human beings and to know, like you said, you have space to be whatever that looks like.
Yep.
You know, and if they dig chicks, if they dig dudes, like that's just orientation. That has nothing to do with whether they're good people or not good people, but it's teaching them from the beginning. You have to define what you think is moral and ethical. And once you do that, you base everything else around it. You have to know the consequences. Now, if this country believes something is moral or ethical and you do not, and you're going to do it, there are consequences, right? So you have to understand that. But raising them, like you said, to ask themselves, you know, and for me to say, are you comfortable being you? Right? Because I didn't have that space. And I still don't often know what that looks like. I have to ask myself that question constantly, but my kids don't.
Yeah.
Right? And so if they feel comfortable being them, that's, I think, a good step in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, and I think that gets to the crux of everything that we've kind of been
Discussing.
leading to it and discussing, is that we are, the first recognition of anything is to recognize the problem and understand the problem, you know. And as humans, we have to realize, as parents, as individuals, as people, we're flawed. We are imperfect beings. So until we as a society understand that and quit trying to act like we are, and this fake, pretentious, you know, fraud that we kind of perpetuate across all kinds of, you know, whether it's with our friends, families, kids, these fake personas, and just own, hey, we are flawed people. We're flawed individuals, and making good people, making good humans, raising good children is and should be the focus. You know, as you grow as a person, be a good person. If you don't know what that is,
Figure it out.
figure that out, or seek to figure that out. Find the people that will lift you up and help you find your community, find your circle. But understand, again, at that granular level, we're all flawed. We've been flawed. The book shows us we're flawed. You know, there's plenty of books that show us how flawed we are as humans.
So the question for you, JD, because like
You know.
you want to refer to the book a lot, and I think that we have very different books that we refer to. I think as women and people who have studied psychology. So like I understand his perception, you know, but I think the question is, do men feel like they have
Acceptance.
comfortable circles to have those discussions in? I know that women do. I don't know if men feel like they can get together and have those very open and honest,
So-
vulnerable discussions.
The original portion of the conversation when we first started off was the masculinity and femininity, you know, conquest of answers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of one of those things, is acceptance
Mm-hmm.
and judgment.
Yeah.
Meaning,
Big one.
meaning,
And that, to answer that question, I would say it depends. Who is your circle and who are your friends as a man? Because without question, there are circles that would not allow this to take place. It is
it's just
the
the way.
paradigm has not the paradigm has not shifted yet.
Mm-hmm.
It may never shift
Right.
with some individuals. But I think that's what we're trying to achieve here is, hey, and what I think is somewhat transpiring within the military community with males and the whole force is, because it's perpetuated there too, that,
Oh yeah.
hey, you have to row That's your one and only job. Row. And keep rowing.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what. And I'm sure that is not just subjective to the military. I'm sure that is in many jobs across the force, wherever that is. Keep rowing. Row. That is your job as a man. We don't have time for
Complexity.
this. We don't have time for depth, complexity. Keep going. So it is a shift, and I think that's one of the intents of this podcast is to bring that depth back to communication, back to men and women, and say, that's okay. That's perfectly fine to have these conversations. I don't care if you are 250 pounds in a brick shithouse. I know you can have just the same amount of issues as I can as felt 170 pounds. You can have those same issues, and that's okay. And there needs to be a space for that to occur. And that's okay. Now, it doesn't mean you gotta be all touchy-feely, and that's not, it doesn't have to happen like that. We're talking about depth of communication and really the depth of that thought process. I'm just asking you to think and actually interpret what's going on in your mind.
So
And the
that's
feelings that are around that, and recognize that's perfectly okay.
So that's beneficial to have that thought process, and I'm grateful that we're having this podcast to help crack that nut. But I think it's also important that we reiterate that that acceptance hasn't hit that paradigm in society, and that we still struggle as a society in humanity with men and women. Because if we don't have a certain character about us, then we may not be accepted into those circles until we have proven that certain characteristic or that certain flaw that is within the others. And so it is very difficult for us as a society to bring into the fold those personnel that may seriously need it more than the others.
100%. And to know that men to this point have repressed emotion to the point that even saying the words "I feel"
Yes,
can completely disrupt their nervous system to the
Yes.
point that they are in fight or flight,
absolutely.
right? And so it's actually like
100%.
they're literally paralyzed. So creating a safe space just for them to reach that point is almost
Impossible.
it's a huge struggle.
Yeah.
And proving it, I think there's a proving process, and even when you go through so many things, dated enough toxic men to know, like there's nothing you can do to create safe space. They have to very much want it and then sit in that, and you're just kind of adding to it. But again, I wouldn't be able to do that if I wasn't backed by so many women that I can talk to, that I can have very deep conversations with. And it's almost so simple to me now than watching, my close male friends and the men that I dearly love struggle with just watching them feel without them even stating the feeling, feeling the feeling, moving into the feeling, having the feeling disrupts the nervous system, so they've gotten to the point where I feel nothing, and that's safe to them.
That's comfort.
That's comfort. It is, but it's literally killing them.
Oh yeah, it's toxic.
And thus creates the toxicity. So we can't. So yes, there are toxic men. 100%.
I don't think, but it doesn't have to.
No.
it
And
does
that's
not.
a choice.
Yeah,
that is a
absolutely.
choice.
There has to be a recognition that there's a problem. And that problem is currently there is, and it's growing, but that space that women have defined and built over time and space is very finite for men. I don't think that is there yet. And that's one of those things that has to grow.
So,
So that we can say in form and fashion,
right.
those things so that guys, when a woman says, we have to talk, or I want to talk, those are the worst words a man ever wants to hear, is we need to talk. It literally has physical, and it'll paralyze a man into like the depths of his mind. Oh my God.
So as a man, do you think that us as a society is going to get eventually to a point where there's more acceptance for men to have those safe spaces and to openly be able to have those moments where they no longer feel like they have to be numb in order to continue rowing?
Or will they just create another war so they never have to do it and they can go back to being barbarians?
Probably barbarians. Yeah, I think we're much better suited for, the barbarian hood of our lives. But I think as long as it is taken with women, it'll take double that
With men.
for men. Just because how ingrained it is into masculinity, into the thought processes of man generationally. And it's growing, it's improving. But you see it today. Any guy that talks about his feelings is instantly like, oh my God,
This guy.
he's got a man bun. It's, they instantly, we instantly start hacking away at that tree that like, no, that, he's touchy-feely, he's loosey-goosey, or he's only doing it for this reason or that reason, So it'll be just as challenging, if not more, for that realization to actually occur. But that's why we're here. Is to say, hey, it's okay to have these conversations, and you should want to have these conversations. A depth in intellect is okay. We should all try to achieve that, because that's what that is we're not devoid of emotions. We're not robots.
Right.
We may want to be. It's easier to be a robot
So much
and say,
easier.
bleep, blurp, blurp, I have no emotion, that's perfect. But that is not actually the case. And it's actually, if we actually look at ourselves as men and how we look at our women and our children, those feelings are there. They're fiercely there. But it's okay to talk about that. And when there are glitches in the system or something's wrong, that's okay, and you should have the space to do that. It doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be in a group circle with group hugs or any of that stuff that I know men are like cringing right now, even thinking about what we're talking about. I can feel it. I can feel it in my being that my man card is probably being revoked.
Moment, yeah.
As we speak, there's somebody like, who is this knucklehead talking right now? Pull that card. But we can get there as a society. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect. But to get to that true partnership, which I think everybody wants, everybody seeks at some point. You don't just marry somebody and then, want to be with a partner, whether that's married or independent. You're trying to find a partnership. But then we always try to fight the partnerships.
We have not established the terminology of what that partnership looks like, which is why we've had so much confusion and frustration.
Yeah.
Because even if you do have two people that come together that love each other, that are with each other for a long time, we still don't understand the full capacity of that partnership, that masculinity and that femininity. We don't know how to balance it as humans to make it equal to both partners. And so I think that's the part that we struggle with, because how much is too much or how little is too little, and how do we keep that balance not only amongst our partner and ourselves, but amongst our groups.
Which is, I think, where a lot of big conversations are happening now too, because we have still been force-fed a very old idea of what it means to be with somebody. And before it was like you find a person or you're given a person and you guys stay together until you die, and that was religious, it was survival. But now it doesn't have to be like that. And so you have to kind of look inside of you and say, am I monogamous? Do I want to be with one person forever? Does this work for me? And then be able to have those very real conversations about whether or not that's true for you. And I think that's, you know, another part of it. And having that discussion with, you know, especially a man who is stuck in the old paradigm, because they want what they want and they'll say whatever it takes to get what they want. You know, a lot of times you're just seeing men and women, and I can't speak for the LGBTQ community, but I know, you know, for the straight community, we're seeing a lot of couples go into this with the men having the idea that, well, she'll be at home and kind of doing these things, and I will still be doing whatever it is that I want to do, versus having this super hard conversation with your partner of, hey, what does it look like if we don't want to be monogamous, but we do want to be together? What does it look like if we want to have babies together, but maybe then be with other people? You know, and that is a very real mammalian discussion, you know, and that comes down to personal ethics then.
So that is a fantastic topic that you brought up, because I think more and more in this society, especially the polyamorous life, is becoming more pronounced. It's not just in theoretical thought.
Correct.
Right? And it's becoming more comfortable because it gives options to help keep that balance in partnerships and relationships. And it's extremely important. And I think a lot of couples have perpetuated a sense of happiness by having those really hard conversations and saying, hey, maybe the relationship that I'm with you is not our only relationship that we have. Right?
And you know, maybe it looks like, you know, we work together, we build together, we achieve together, but you know, ethical non-monogamy is very prevalent now.
Yes, it is.
You know, so it's just understanding, hey, being with one person isn't realistic. You know,
And again, going back to the book, there was at a time and space that women were of the tribe. Everything was done for the tribe. That paradigm shifted over time and space, you know, because, you know, for whatever reasons, that didn't become a thing, you know, that kind of phased itself out. Tribes went away, it became more as civilized, as communities civilized, and there were things pushed into civilization of, hey, what is right, what is wrong. Those dynamics changed. But again, it's full circle on all of these conversations. None of it is new, but it's new to us, I guess. And those conversations should occur. They absolutely should occur.
I think there's a lot of new things, because I mean, our civilized history is still written entirely by white men. So, you know, the thought that women have a very beautiful sexuality to them hasn't been encompassed in a very, very, very long time.
I'm really happy that you put the quotation marks on this new stuff, because this has been going on for eons. Absolute eons.
Yeah.
And it's not just the men with multiple women.
I think that, one, I appreciate both of you guys coming
Oh,
and sharing.
absolutely.
This
So
has
excited to be
been
doing this.
absolutely amazing, minus the flawed issues, which we'll work out.
Semantics.
But I think that gets this conversation proves to me that we're on the right track, because everything that we are saying stair steps into everything where we want to talk about. Having those radical conversations, what is deemed radical, you know, could be just a conversation to some. But it gets back to those questions. How did we get here? Why do men feel and think the way they do? Why are those conversations of intimacy might as well be a spear to his chest? Or why is that so difficult? Why? Well, I think now understanding, and the more we kind of look into this and delve into each of these subjects, is there's been an imprint generationally that some may agree is completely on track. some are counter to that. Maybe there's a happy medium. You know, I don't know. But I think all of those conversations need to be had. And I think they will make for great conversations in the future on Third Degree with JD.
Well, thank
So
you for
again,
having
I
us.
appreciate everybody.
It's been great. I hope it
Um,
resonates with people.
I think if people are willing to listen, take 5 minutes out. You know, I know this has gone on
A little longer than 5 minutes.
a little longer than 5 minutes, but if you're willing to listen, which I think that's the first thing, we have to be willing to accept. We have to
Agreed.
be willing to educate ourselves and challenge the status quo and challenge what we've been told. Americans are notoriously, independent. Why should we not apply that in our daily lives when it comes to education? We challenge everything. Our civilization was founded on challenging the status quo. So, no, I think it's absolutely worthy of future conversations, and I definitely look forward to having those conversations going forward. So thank you for coming today.
You're most welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.